afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast Addendum. Since some people asked for it, I'm here to talk about the Wehrmacht Grenadiers uniforms and why I don't particularly like it. Why I think, in fact, it looks pretty rubbish. So here's the thing. I mean, the basic sort of summer Grenadier uniform, which is one I really dislike, but this winter one is not particularly much better, is basically sort of the Splinter Tan or Splinter Pattern or Cube whatever sort of pattern uniform. Technically, though, it was basically what the sort of very, very basic Wehrmacht camouflage pattern, which actually mostly applied to the Zeltbahn or sort of, well, tent sort of stuff. It was basically what they used for the tents. And most of the uniforms were basically just improvised out of tent material. Maybe some cases tailor-made, but most cases just sort of more basic uniforms, which apparently most of them were parkas and likes there. But even then, those uniforms were in fact incredibly rare. So am I would be starting here, then why is this the basic Wehrmacht Grenadier uniform? I mean, again, it's an incredibly rare pattern, yet somehow every single Wehrmacht Grenadier is running about with it. I mean, that's already the issue there, in sort of in a sense, we could already start with the rarity issue. Like, out of all the patterns they could have chose for, they went for the probably least produced pattern of the Wehrmacht, which would obviously have winter camouflage version in building it by the way, actual sort of reversible, but they didn't include that one. So it sort of gets a bit weird there already. But just more importantly, it just looks kind of rubbish. In part because of the way it's applied. Partly the sort of green colours sort of just stand out much more than everything else. So it just sort of looks a bit weird. And more importantly, just it sort of creates a sort of blurry mess for the entire Grenadier squad, where they just sort of no part particularly stands up because it's everything just being caught up in this bright green mess of colour. And again, while that's great for military purposes, for in-game purposes, it's not particularly neat to look at. Like, it doesn't really particularly break up the figure. There's no contrast. There's nothing. I mean, compared to it, you can sort of slightly better tell out the details, but on the Grenadiers, it sort of just falls together in one bit. And it's also very important. It's not sort of, how you imagine most Grenadiers look. In fact, Google Wehrmacht Grenadier, go into the images and look up there, and you'll notice most Wehrmacht Grenadiers do not look like this at all. And even the words particular where this one actually sort of more of a sort of improvised sort of jacket they were made out of the set tent material, as an example. Yet somehow we had to just assume these are the sort of standard ones. I mean, there's just less of that sort of grungy look, in particular as the war went on. The Wehrmacht Grenadiers would have much more very camouflage uniforms, also just a bit more mismatched. Like not the standard field grey uniform, no black helmet or nothing. I mean, it's just this thing. But it just, again, this sort of mess, it would just sort of all blur together. They didn't ever try to create any contrast with the Grenadier uniforms, like, say, non-camouflage pants and a helmet that's maybe just black with some kind of different other pattern. It just sort of creates this, again, it doesn't look visually appealing, to be honest. It looks rubbish, and more importantly, again, it just sort of breaks with that sort of, common knowledge of this is how Wehrmacht Grenadiers look. These chaps do not look like it remotely. And that tends to sort of really undercut the Grenadiers look because they just do not look like. I mean, they sort of break with the aesthetic again. The Wehrmacht worn out, dragged out, and for some reason they're all wearing this incredibly rare pattern camouflage uniform. Hang on, what? Right? I mean, again, most standard Wehrmacht Grenadiers would not have access to it in most cases. Whatever hat would have usually been improvised or pilfered from the Waffen-SS or other sources. What certainly would not have been, this again. Produced by 1942, there was some produced, but again in a small run. So it sort of just gets a bit weird that somehow again every single Grenadier looks like this, and again it just makes them not look like Wehrmacht Grenadiers very much at all. And again, it's just also visually unappealing. They could have chosen any number of variation, even just with a Splinter Tan, to be honest. I mean, it's just regular pants, helmet, maybe a different kind of sort of camouflage helmet, maybe just with a bit of brush on it, some grass stuck onto it. That could have been done. But again, we somehow end up with these Grenadiers. And honestly, people like to complain about the Company's One Grenadiers, so walked around wearing pajamas, but at least you can fucking tell their head from the rest of the body. At least they sort of look visually distinct, whereas these again just sort of green sort of blurry mess compared again to the old Wehrmacht Grenadiers or the Volksgrenadiers or the Stormtroopers, which had much more distinctive looks and uniforms. And again, the Stormtroopers very nice, and they had a nice camouflage parka, which would be much more common, also sort of gives them a more distinct bulky look, whereas again this is somehow a camouflage shirt. Plus, helmet with its own look, and then sort of trousers again to sort of, bring out there. That much better, stronger contrast between the different elements of the body, creating a much more visually distinct unit that also looks pretty cool. And again, the parka sort of helps create this sort of more bulky look, sort of more meaner, nastier look. And again, that's sort of to an extent what the Wehrmacht Grenadiers lack. They just lack any sort of bulk. They're again supposed to look like meaner infantry, but they look comparatively pretty light. I mean, they're not even wearing any gear in any sort of greater degree. There's a bit here, on the rear, like a few bags and kit, but like nothing serious. They also just end up looking a bit, wonky comparatively to that. So that sort of creates this, not, again, visually interesting, appealing, or sort of very aesthetically good look for the Wehrmacht Grenadiers. It's just sort of rubbish, really. And the winter version, obviously, I could also make a video on that, though probably won't. I just, rather falls in the same sort of, same coloured, blurry mess that just looks really, really dull and not very much, interesting to look at all. So it just sort of ends up kind of not working. Which is, rather unfortunate, since again, they could have had a lot of options to go with, but somehow just ended up on the, in many ways is very inaccurate, but also yet somehow, despite the inaccuracies, which should somehow make for more excitement, really boring look. So I mean, it just sort of, the Grenadiers here just fail on an aesthetic look, historical look, and just, bloody well, just appealing to the eye look, which I think, and also of course is aesthetics, but just really, it's just not good design visually, which is of course rather unfortunate. So in that regard, the Grenadiers just don't end up working particularly well, in my opinion. And I just always never liked them. I always thought they looked rubbish. I mean, the Osttruppen end up looking like better Grenadiers than the bloody Grenadiers, which, is not what should be happening. Again, I understand why this might happen. They were sort of, a bit strapped for resources. Hell, if you look for a lot of the concept art, there'll be a lot more sort of infantry being dreamed up. But even then, the somehow basic concept for the Grenadier was this, by the way. For some reason, it was this that was somehow the basic Grenadier concept, which is quite unfortunate. I'm giving, it's trying to make them look exotic and nice, but that's not really the Grenadier's job. The Grenadier's job is to look worn out after a lot of fighting, pushing back at the enemy, yet somehow we end up with this green, indistinct mess that just looks kinda, So that's sort of it. I mean, again, historically the uniform existed, but it was produced in small numbers. It looks like a green mess, and it's just, again, not very appealing. It just sort of fails to capture that Wehrmacht aesthetic that, look, that sort of makes the Grenadier to an extent actually look iconic. And that can also be a bit of an argument. Again, they just failed the iconic look of the Grenadier, the field grey uniform, the helmet, the backpack, and everything. Instead, we just get this. So there you go, a bit more of a rant, sort of a bit, less well organised, because, again, it's sort of more aesthetics, it's more visual bits. So I'm obviously not, the hugest art historian or art discusser, but, I felt like just at least to weigh in on this and just, try to come up with my thoughts as to why I think the Grenadiers, quite frankly, look like complete and utter rubbish in the game. So hopefully you found this entertaining, interesting. If you did, subscribe, like, share, comment, and of course, feel free to support me by donating or pledging on Patreon. Links are in the video description. This is Imperial signing off until we get another discussion on something, like this maybe. And of course, feel free to sign off on things in the comments. This is Imperial signing off, and see you all for another video. Cheers.